Rashomon. So, there was this one evening, right? There's this guy, a lowly servant, just chilling under the Rashomon Gate, waiting for the rain to stop. Under that wide gate, it's just him. Well, except for a cricket perched on a few of those worn-out red pillars here and there. Now, normally, at Rashomon, being on Suzaku Avenue and all, you'd expect to see a few more folks like market women with their umbrellas or coolies with their straw hats waiting out the rain. But nope, it's just this guy. And why's that? Well, you see, Kyoto's been hit with earthquakes, dust storms, fires, famines, you name it, for the past couple of years. So, the situation in the city isn't exactly peachy. According to the records, folks were smashing up Buddha statues and stuff, selling the wood with its red lacquer or gold and silver leaf for firewood. Since Kyoto was in a sorry state, nobody bothered fixing up Rashomon. So, it became a haunt for foxes, thieves, and eventually, it became a custom to dump corpses here without anyone to claim them. So, when night falls, folks naturally avoid the area around this gate like the plague. Instead, crows started flocking in from who knows where. During the day, you'd see them circling around, cawing, especially when the sky turns red at sunset, making it look like sesame seeds scattered all over. Of course, they're there to peck at the flesh of the dead lying on top of the gate. Well, today, you don't see a single one. But you can spot their droppings here and there on the worn stone steps with long grass growing in between. Our servant here is sitting on the top step of the 7-tiered stone staircase, resting his back against a freshly washed navy blue sliding door, absent-mindedly staring at the rain while nursing a big pimple on his right cheek. Now, the author just said earlier that the servant was waiting for the rain to stop. But even if it did stop, the guy doesn't really have anywhere special to go. Normally, he'd head back to his master's house, but he was given time off a few days ago. As I mentioned before, Kyoto wasn't exactly thriving at the time. So, this servant being let off was just another ripple of this decline. So, rather than saying the servant was waiting for the rain to stop, it's more like he's caught in the rain, with nowhere to go, feeling lost. Plus, the weather today is affecting the sentimental mood of this Heian-era servant. The rain started pouring since the hour of the monkey, but shows no sign of stopping. So, our guy is trying to figure out somehow to manage tomorrow's livelihood, trying to make sense of the senseless, going through pointless thoughts, vaguely hearing the rain falling on Suzaku Avenue. The rain envelopes Rashomon, gathering with a shh from afar. Twilight gradually lowers the sky, and if you look up, you'll see the gate's roof supporting heavy, dark clouds that seem to lean on the protruding eaves. When there's no way out, there's no hesitating to choose a means. If you hesitate, it's either dying of hunger under some dirt or dying like a dog, abandoned on top of this gate. If you don't choose, well, the servant's thoughts have wandered down the same path countless times, only to arrive at the same conclusion eventually. But this if just keeps on being an if forever. The servant acknowledged the idea of not choosing a means, but lacked the courage to actively affirm the subsequent, there's no choice but to become a thief that should logically follow. He let out a big sneeze and then solemnly stood up. Kyoto, chilled by the evening, was so cold that one would wish for a brazier. The wind, along with the dusk, blew through the gaps between the gate's pillars without restraint. Even the cricket that had been perched on the red pillars had already gone elsewhere. The servant, with his neck drawn in, cautiously looked around the gate, his navy blue sliding door draped over his shoulders on top of his yellow sweatshirt. He searched for a place where he could spend the night without the risk of rain and wind, without fear of being seen, just somewhere to get through the night. So, when he noticed a broad ladder leading up to the gate's upper floor, also painted in red, he saw a chance. If he climbed up, even if there were people, they would most likely be dead bodies. With that in mind, the servant carefully ascended the ladder, making sure his saintly sword hanging from his waist wouldn't slip, and stepped onto the bottom rung with his straw sandals. Sometime later, on the middle section of the wide ladder leading to the upper floor of the Rashomon Gate, a man crouched like a cat, peering upwards cautiously, holding his breath as he observed the scene above. The flickering light from the fire above faintly illuminated his right cheek. It was a cheek with a pimple filled with pus among short stubble. From the beginning, the servant had assumed that whoever was up there would be nothing but dead bodies. However, as he climbed a couple more steps, he noticed someone tending to a fire, moving it around. The muddy yellow light flickered and reflected on the cobweb-covered ceiling, making it immediately recognizable. Lighting a fire on top of Rashomon on a rainy night meant they were no ordinary people. Silently, like a guardian spirit, the servant ascended, trying not to make a sound with his footsteps, finally crawling up the steep ladder to the top step. Then, lying as flat as possible, with his neck stretched out as far as he dared, he cautiously peered into the interior of the upper floor. Inside, as rumored, were several corpses scattered randomly. However, due to the limited reach of the firelight, he couldn't discern their exact number. What he could vaguely make out was the presence of both naked and clothed corpses, likely a mix of men and women. And these corpses, resembling handmade dolls molded from clay, were lying on the floor as if they were once living beings, mouths open, hands outstretched, rolling around. Moreover, the parts of their shoulders and chests illuminated by the faint firelight made the shadows of the lower parts even darker, as they remained silent as if they were dumb for eternity. The stench of decay from these corpses made the servant instinctively cover his nose, but the next moment, he forgot about it as a strong emotion overwhelmed him, almost entirely depriving him of his sense of smell. At that moment, for the first time, the servant saw a person crouching among the corpses. It was an old woman, short in stature, thin, with white hair, resembling a monkey, wearing a cypress-colored kimono. The old woman held a piece of pine wood with a lit fire in her right hand, peering at one of the corpses as if examining its face. Judging by the length of the hair, it was probably a female corpse. Moved by 6 parts of fear and 4 parts of curiosity, the servant temporarily forgot to breathe. He felt as if his hair was standing on end. Then, the old woman inserted the piece of pine wood into the floorboards and, placing both hands on the neck of the corpse she had been gazing at, began to pull out its long hair one by one, much like a mother monkey removing lice from her child's fur. As each strand of hair was pulled out one by one, the servant's fear gradually diminished from his heart. And at the same time, an intense hatred towards this old woman began to grow, little by little. Well, to say hatred towards this old woman might be misleading. Rather, it was a growing aversion to all kinds of evil, increasing in strength every minute. If someone were to ask the servant at that moment whether he would choose to starve to death or become a thief, as he had pondered under the gate earlier, he would probably have chosen starvation without any hesitation. The intensity of the man's hatred burned fiercely, much like the pine wood inserted into the old woman's floor. Of course, the servant didn't understand why the old woman was pulling the hair of the dead bodies. Therefore, he didn't know whether to categorize it as good or evil. However, for the servant, on this rainy night, atop Rashomon, the act of pulling the hair of the dead was already an unforgivable evil in itself. Of course, the servant had long forgotten his earlier intention of becoming a thief. So, the servant exerted force with both legs and suddenly jumped up from the ladder. Gripping the hilt of his sacred sword, he strode boldly toward the old woman. Needless to say, the old woman was startled. As soon as she saw the servant, she jumped as if shot by a crossbow. "Where do you think you're going?" The servant blocked her escape path as she stumbled over the corpses, berating her. The old woman still tried to push past him. Again, the servant pushed her back. The two grappled amidst the corpses, silently struggling for a while. However, the outcome was clear from the beginning. The servant eventually seized the old woman's arm and twisted it forcefully. It was a bony arm, like a chicken's leg. "What were you doing? Speak up. If you don't, this is what you'll get," the servant said, releasing her and thrusting the scabbard of his sword in front of her eyes. However, the old woman remained silent, trembling hands, gasping for breath, eyes wide open as if they were about to pop out of their sockets, stubbornly silent like a mute. Seeing this, the servant realized for the first time that the life and death of this old woman were entirely at his mercy. And with this realization, the intense hatred that had burned so fiercely in his heart until now somehow cooled down. What remained was only a sense of calm satisfaction, akin to the feeling of accomplishment after completing a task successfully. So, looking down at the old woman, the servant softened his voice slightly and said, "I'm not an official from the magistrate's office. I'm just a traveler passing under this gate just now. So, there's no need to tie you up and decide what to do with you. All you have to do is tell me what you were doing on top of this gate at this hour." The old woman then widened her eyes even further, observing the servant's face with sharp, carnivorous eyes. Then, she moved her wrinkled lips, almost merging with her nose, as if chewing on something. The movement of her thin throat and protruding Adam's apple was visible. At that moment, a voice like a crow's cawing came from her throat, wheezing and reaching the servant's ears. "I was pulling this hair, gonna make a wig out of it," she gasped. The servant felt surprisingly disappointed by the old woman's mundane answer. And with that disappointment came back the previous hatred, now accompanied by a cool contempt, settling into his heart. Then, it seemed that her attitude had also reached the other party. With one hand still holding the long hair she had plucked from the dead bodies, the old woman muttered in a voice reminiscent of a frog, saying something like this, "Sure, pulling the hair of the dead might be considered a bad thing. But all these dead folks here were decent enough to allow it. Right now, I didn't pull any woman's hair. I cut snakes into 4-inch pieces, dried them, and went to sell them to the warriors as dried fish. Even if they died of disease, I would still go to sell them now. Besides, this woman's dried fish was so tasty that the warriors always bought them for their meals. I don't think what this woman did was bad. If not, I would have starved to death. So, I don't consider what I did bad either. It's just that if I hadn't done it, I would have starved to death. Knowing well that there was no other way, this woman probably would have overlooked what I did." The old woman roughly conveyed something along these lines. The servant sheathed his sword and listened to this story coldly while holding the handle of the sword with his left hand. Of course, with his right hand, he was worried about a large pimple oozing pus on his red cheek as he listened. However, amidst listening to this, a certain courage arose in the servant's heart. It was the courage he had lacked just a while ago under the gate. And now, as he had captured this old woman again on top of this gate, the courage he felt was entirely in the opposite direction. The servant hadn't just been wavering between starving to death or becoming a thief. At that moment, starvation was almost completely pushed out of his consciousness. Is that so? When the old woman finished her story, the servant emphasized mockingly. Then, stepping forward, he suddenly let go of his right hand from the pimple and grabbed the collar of the old woman, saying fiercely, "Then don't blame me for stripping you. I have no choice but to do it, or else I'll starve to death." The servant quickly stripped off the old woman's clothes. Then, he roughly kicked her, trying to cling to the corpses, onto the ground. It was just 5 steps away from the mouth of the ladder. The servant held the stripped-off cypress-colored clothes under his arm and quickly descended the steep ladder into the depths of the night. It was not long after that the old woman, who had fallen as if dead, lifted her naked body from among the corpses. Moaning and groaning, she crawled to the mouth of the ladder, relying on the still burning light of the fire. From there, she leaned forward, plucked a short white hair, and peered under the gate. Outside, there was nothing but pitch-black night. No one knew where the servant had gone. What Rashomon aims to convey is the meaning of a living, and what constitutes good and evil. In Rashomon, the essence of being human is questioned alongside the concept of evil. Are the actions of the commoner and the old woman, who commit sins to survive, truly evil? When weighing living against justice, which is the right choice? It's prompting us to ponder,